My name is Linda Parker, and I'm 68 years old. I've spent most of my life working behind a sewing machine or at the cash register of small-town stores, raising my only son, Daniel, after my husband passed away far too young. I had always pictured myself watching him walk down the aisle with tears of pride in my eyes, believing that moment would feel like a reward for all the years of sacrifice. Instead, the night of his wedding began with a sting I will never forget. I was late, embarrassingly late. A plumbing mishap had flooded my kitchen that morning, and by the time I had wrung out towels, called a repairman, and changed into a dress that still smelled faintly of bleach, the ceremony was nearly over. I parked on the far edge of the reception grounds outside Nashville, smoothed the wrinkles from my skirt, and hurried toward the sound of music and laughter drifting through the trees. Just as I reached the corner of the garden where strings of white lights dangled from oak branches, I stopped. I heard voices, bright, young, careless. Rachel, my new daughter-in-law, stood with two bridesmaids near the bar. Her laughter cut through the hum of conversation. Can you believe it? She didn't show. Honestly, it's a relief. I was worried she'd turn this into one of her dramatic moments. Another woman chimed in. It feels lighter without her here. They clinked their glasses, celebrating as if my absence were a gift. The words landed heavier than any insult I had endured in my working-class years. My stomach clenched, my face burned, and my breath caught in my chest. I pressed my back against the ivy-covered wall, willing myself not to cry. Not here, not now. All around me the party glowed with joy, candles flickering on tables, children chasing fireflies, but I stood outside it all, invisible and unwanted. I thought of the nights I had hemmed Rachel's dress without charging a dime, the weekends I had skipped rest to help Daniel move apartments, the thousands of dollars that had trickled away from my savings into theirs. And now, here they were, toasting to my absence like it was champagne worth savoring. Something shifted inside me in that moment, a crack across old illusions. I knew I couldn't just step forward, smile, and pretend nothing had been said. I turned away from the laughter, my heels sinking into the damp grass, and wondered if I had just overheard the truth that would change everything between me and my son. I walked into the reception a few minutes later, forcing a smile that felt brittle on my lips. Music floated from the bandstand, couples swayed on the dance floor, and waiters weaved through the crowd with trays of sparkling cider. No one seemed to notice I had slipped in. Daniel was across the room, tall and handsome in his tuxedo, his arm looped around Rachel's waist as they posed for photographs. For a moment, I hesitated, hoping he would spot me, his eyes lighting up the way they used to when he was a boy rushing home from school. But he didn't. His gaze passed over the crowd and never paused on me. I sat at an empty table near the back, my hands folded tight in my lap. From there, I watched as Rachel's parents floated through the room like royalty, greeted with warm embraces and praise. They had given Daniel a down payment on his first condo. I'd heard. Their influence showed in every detail, the catering, the venue, the band. My modest presence felt like a poor patch sewn onto a fine silk gown. After a while, Daniel finally made his way toward me. "Mom," he said, leaning down to brush a quick kiss against my cheek. "Glad you made it. Everything okay?" His tone was polite, distracted, already turning away before I could answer. Then he was gone again, swallowed back into the sea of guests. I sat frozen, my heart heavy with the echo of his indifference. When dessert was served, a slice of cake was placed in front of me. I lifted the fork, but the sweetness turned to sand in my mouth. I remembered birthdays when Daniel was young, how I'd saved up to buy flour and sugar so he could have a cake shaped like a soccer ball, how his eyes had lit up at the sight of it. Now, no one cared if I ate or not. I was just another body at a table tucked in the shadows. As the night stretched on, I felt the weight of those words I had overheard pressing harder. Relief at my absence, laughter at my expense. I smiled when spoken to, but inside, something had shifted for the first time. I wondered if the bond I thought unbreakable between mother and son had already frayed beyond repair. The days after the wedding dragged like gray clouds. I tried to shake off what I'd overheard, telling myself it was nothing more than careless chatter after a few drinks. But once a truth lodges in your chest, it won't let go. Everywhere I looked, the evidence was waiting, as if it had been sitting in plain sight for years and I had simply refused to see it. I thought back to Christmas last year. Daniel and Rachel had given me a gift card tucked into a blank envelope. No note, no warmth, just a slip of plastic worth $50. I told myself it was thoughtful, that they wanted me to choose what I liked. But deep down, I remembered the knitted scarf I had made for Rachel, hours of delicate stitches, and how she had tossed it aside without even trying it on. I had convinced myself not to take offense. Now I wasn't so sure. There were birthdays, too. My 65th had passed with nothing more than a text from Daniel at 10 o'clock at night. "Happy birthday, Mom. Hope it's a good one." No phone call, no dinner, not even a small cake. I had sat at my kitchen table with a slice of store-bought pie, whispering to myself that he was busy, that his work was demanding, that he meant well. It was easier to believe those lies than to admit the ache of neglect. And the phone calls, I began to tally them in my mind. Rarely did Daniel ring just to ask how I was feeling or to share something about his day. More often it was, "Mom, can you watch the house this weekend?" Or, "Mom, could you lend us a little to cover the deposit?" I had said yes, again and again, convincing myself that this was what mothers did. But the pattern had been clear all along. I was useful, dependable, convenient, never cherished. Each memory pricked at me like pins sliding into fabric until I could no longer pretend the garment of our relationship was whole. It was threadbare, patched too many times with excuses of my own making. And for the first time, I let myself feel not only the sadness but the simmering anger beneath it. One evening, about a week after the wedding, I sat alone at my kitchen table with a stack of old folders and receipts spread out in front of me. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock on the wall. I pulled out a yellow notepad and began to write down every dollar I could remember giving Daniel over the years. At first, it felt silly, almost petty. But as the numbers added up, the weight of them pressed hard on my chest. There was the $3,000 I had lent him when his car broke down in college, another $5,000 when he and Rachel needed help with their first apartment deposit, a few hundred here and there for utilities, furniture, a vacation they swore they would pay me back for. The biggest chunk was nearly $15,000 over the years of temporary support during job changes and emergencies. By the time I finished scribbling the figures, the total stared back at me, over $35,000. Money I could have saved for my own medical bills or for the quiet years of retirement I had always dreamed about but never planned well enough for. Next, I flipped through my phone log, the history stretching back months. Almost every call from Daniel was tied to a request. "Can you cover for us this weekend? Do you have a spare key? Any chance you could send something to help with the mortgage?" The realization settled like a stone in my stomach. He had reached out when he needed something. Rarely, if ever, had he just wanted to hear my voice. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. My whole adult life had been built around giving, first to Daniel as a child, then as a struggling young man, then as a husband trying to find his footing. I had been the safety net, the invisible scaffolding holding up his world. And in return, I had convinced myself that crumbs of affection were enough. That night, with the numbers glaring from the page and the silence heavy around me, I felt something sharp rise within me. Sadness, yes, but also anger. An anger that demanded I stop pretending. An anger that whispered it was time to reclaim what pieces of life I still had left. The following week, I drove into town and walked straight into the local credit union. The teller greeted me with a polite smile, but my hands trembled slightly as I slid my ID across the counter. "I'd like to open a new account," I told her. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. For years, my pension had been deposited into the same account Daniel knew about, the same one he had leaned on whenever he came asking for just a little help. Not anymore. I signed the forms, transferred the balance, and tucked my new checkbook into my purse with a strange, exhilarating sense of secrecy. From there, I scheduled an appointment with a lawyer named Mr. Miller, a gray-haired man whose office smelled faintly of leather and old books. He listened quietly as I explained that I wanted to update my will and change my emergency contacts. "It's important to me," I said, "that my decisions are clear, and that no one assumes they can step in and take over my affairs." He nodded with the calm of someone who had heard many stories like mine, but his eyes softened with understanding. Walking out of that office, documents neatly signed, I felt taller somehow, as if the air itself had grown lighter. Back at home, I picked up my cell phone and dialed the customer service line. Within an hour, I had a brand new number. I sent it only to a handful of trusted people, my sister, my cousin Marianne, and 2 close friends. For the first time in decades, my phone would not ring with last-minute pleas for money or favors. The silence was golden. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again, but instead of receipts, I spread out stationery. I wrote a letter to Daniel and Rachel. It wasn't angry or dramatic. I simply thanked them for the years we'd shared and told them I needed time to step back and take care of myself. I folded the paper carefully, slid it into an envelope, and left it on the counter where they would see it the next time they came by. When I finally laid my head on the pillow, the house felt different. It wasn't filled with dread or waiting for the next call of duty. It was mine, quiet, calm, and free. For the first time in a long while, I slept through the night without waking in a cold sweat. The act of reclaiming my life had only just begun, but already it felt like breathing after years underwater. It was a Sunday evening when Daniel invited me over for dinner. I almost declined, but something inside me wanted to see things clearly, without illusions. I arrived with a bottle of iced tea in hand, the kind he used to love when he was younger. The house smelled of roasted chicken and garlic bread, Rachel's specialty, though she barely looked at me when I walked in. We sat around the table, the 3 of us, clinking silverware against plates as small talk limped along. Daniel asked about the plumbing repair, about whether I'd been keeping busy. His voice was kind enough but distant, as if he were speaking to a neighbor instead of his mother. Rachel scrolled on her phone between bites, her polished nails tapping the screen. I chewed slowly, tasting very little, my mind drifting toward all the things left unsaid. Then, as he reached for another slice of bread, Daniel spoke words that landed like a blow I never saw coming. "When the time comes, this place will be perfect for us," he said casually, gesturing toward my modest house as though it already belonged to him. Rachel and I were just saying how convenient it will be when we don't have to look for something new. The fork slipped from my hand and clattered against the plate. For a moment, no one moved. Rachel kept her eyes down, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Daniel didn't notice the shock that must have flooded my face. He went on talking about square footage and yard space, as if my life, my home, were nothing more than a future asset waiting to be claimed. I excused myself to the bathroom, but instead of walking down the hall, I stepped outside to the porch. The cool night air rushed against my skin, and I gripped the railing to steady myself. That single comment had cracked open a truth so undeniable I could no longer hide from it. To him, I wasn't a mother to be cherished. I was an obstacle, a caretaker, and eventually, an inheritance. That night, back in my own kitchen, I packed a suitcase. I wrote another letter, longer this time, explaining that I needed distance, that I could no longer play the role they had assigned me. I placed it on the counter beside the first one, then turned off the lights. With the weight of my decision heavy but firm, I loaded the suitcase into my car and drove toward Marianne's home in Knoxville, leaving behind not just a house, but years of being taken for granted. It had been 3 months since I left, and life in Marianne's quiet town had begun to soften the sharp edges of my heart. One morning, as I settled into a corner booth at the local cafe with a book, I saw Daniel's figure through the window. My breath caught. He stepped inside, scanning the room until his eyes landed on me. He looked thinner, more worn, his shoulders sagging in a way I didn't remember. "Mom," he said softly as he slid into the seat across from me. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup, bracing myself. "I shouldn't have said what I did about the house," he began, his voice low. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded." He rubbed a hand across his forehead. "But Rachel's pregnant. We're overwhelmed. And we need you." The words hung in the air. "We need you." I searched his face, looking for the tenderness of a son who missed his mother. Instead, I saw desperation, the kind born from necessity rather than love. I took a slow sip before answering. "Daniel, do you realize what you just said? Not 'I miss you, Mom.' Not 'I'm sorry for hurting you.' You came here because you need something." His jaw tightened, eyes flashing with frustration. "That's not fair. You're my mother. Family is supposed to help." "I have helped," I said, my voice steady though my chest trembled. "For decades, I have given my time, my money, my energy, until there was nothing left for me. And what I overheard at your wedding, what you said at dinner about my house, Daniel, those weren't slips of the tongue. They revealed how little you see me, how little respect you have for what I've done." He leaned forward, his voice breaking. "So you're just going to turn your back on me, on your grandchild?" Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't falter. "No, I will love that child, and I will love you. But love does not mean being used until I'm empty. I cannot return to the life where I am only convenient." The silence stretched between us, thick with things neither of us could take back. Finally, Daniel pushed back his chair, his eyes dark with anger and hurt. He walked out without another word, the bell above the cafe door jingling sharply in his wake. I sat there with tears sliding down my cheeks, but beneath the ache, I felt a strange strength. For the first time, I had stood firm. Life in Marianne's town unfolded at a slower pace, and I found myself savoring its rhythm. A month after I arrived, I applied for a part-time position at the local library. The pay was modest, but the work fed my soul. Children would rush in after school, their voices echoing through the aisles as they searched for adventure in the pages of books. They started calling me Miss Linda of the Library, a nickname that warmed me in ways I hadn't expected. Their laughter, their wide-eyed questions, reminded me of Daniel when he was small, before life hardened him, before Rachel's world swept him away. In the mornings, I tended a small patch of soil behind Marianne's house. I planted tomatoes. peppers, and herbs. The earthy smell of turned soil grounding me. Watching tiny green shoots break through the dirt gave me a sense of renewal. Each sprout felt like proof that life could begin again, even after years of feeling drained and invisible. On Wednesday evenings, I joined a book club at the church. We sat in a circle of folding chairs, mugs of tea in hand, and discussed novels that sparked laughter, tears, and sometimes heated debates. For the first time in years, my voice felt heard. My opinions mattered. No one brushed them aside or treated me like an afterthought. The women in the group became friends, their invitations to potlucks and game nights pulling me back into a community I hadn't realized I was missing. And then there was George. He was a retired history teacher with kind eyes and a gentle way of speaking. We met when he stopped by the library looking for a biography of Abraham Lincoln. Over time, our conversation stretched beyond books. He told me about his late wife, the garden he still kept, the quiet loneliness that had settled in after she passed. I shared bits of my story. Not everything. Not yet, but enough for him to understand the cracks in my heart. We started meeting for coffee on Saturday mornings, sometimes walking through the farmer's market afterward. His companionship wasn't grand or dramatic. It was steady, like the dependable tick of a clock. And for a woman who had spent years giving without receiving, that steadiness felt like a gift. As the months passed, I realized I was no longer defined by what Daniel and Rachel expected of me. I was building a life of my own, one with laughter, friendship, and a peace I had thought was lost forever. Nearly a year had passed when a cream-colored envelope arrived in Marianne's mailbox with Daniel's handwriting across the front. My hands shook as I opened it, unsure of what I would find. Inside was a birth announcement, tiny pink footprints stamped across thick cardstock. Ella Grace Parker, born healthy and strong, my granddaughter. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, tracing those little prints with my fingertip. A flood of memories came back. Daniel's first steps, his laughter when I used to chase him through the yard, the pride I had felt at every milestone. The ache was sharp, but beneath it lay something softer. Despite everything, love still lived in me. That evening, I pulled out my knitting basket, the one I had almost given away when I left my old house. Slowly, stitch by stitch, I worked a blanket of soft lavender yarn. Each loop carried a prayer for Ella's health, for Daniel's wisdom, for Rachel's patience. I wasn't making it as a duty or to prove my worth. I was making it because I wanted to, because love given freely is never wasted. When the blanket was finished, I wrapped it carefully in brown paper, tied it with twine, and slipped a note inside. Congratulations on your new arrival. May she grow in love and kindness. This gift is from me, with no strings attached. I mailed it the next morning, my heart both heavy and light. I didn't expect a response, and none came. But that was all right. My worth was no longer tied to whether Daniel picked up the phone or Rachel offered gratitude. I had reclaimed my dignity, my peace, and my place in the world. On Sunday afternoon, I sat on the porch with George, watching the garden sway in the breeze. "Do you miss them?" he asked gently. "Of course," I said, my eyes on the horizon. But I've learned that missing someone and giving yourself away are two different things. I can love them from here, while still loving myself enough to stay free. As the sun dipped low, I felt a deep calm settle over me. My story wasn't one of bitterness, but of boundaries. Sometimes the greatest act of love is to step back, to let go, and to choose yourself. And that, I realized, was the kind of love I had finally learned to embrace. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.